12-year-old girl gives birth to alien twins. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The hospital room buzzed with the faint hum of machines, the air thick with tension and the antiseptic scent of bleach. Bright fluorescent lights reflected off the sterile white walls, a stark contrast to the cries coming from the girl lying in the bed. Sophia Thompson was only 12 years old. Her face, usually full of freckles and laughter, was now twisted in pain. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she gripped the thin hospital sheets tightly, her small body trembling. "Stay calm, Sophia. Just keep breathing," urged Nurse Claire, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She stood beside the bed, her voice soft but firm, doing her best to comfort the child. Sophia tried to nod, her breathing ragged as she stared at the tiny creature cradled in her arms. It wasn't a baby, not in any way she recognized. Its skin was smooth, a deep grayish hue that seemed to shimmer faintly under the harsh hospital lights. Its eyes, large, black and round, blinked slowly as it nestled closer to Sophia's chest, making soft clicking noises that sounded almost soothing. Nurse Claire stepped back, her hands trembling slightly as she scribbled something on her clipboard. She had been a nurse for over 20 years, had seen babies born premature, born underweight, born with complications. But this? Nothing in her training could explain what she was seeing. "Dr. Mills," she called, her voice tight. The doctor, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and weary eyes, turned sharply from the doorway where he had been whispering to a cluster of equally puzzled staff members. He strode toward the bed, his face pale despite his attempts to appear calm. "Sophia," he said gently, crouching beside her bed. "You're doing great. Can I see the baby?" Sophia shook her head, her arms tightening protectively around the small, alien creature. "Don't touch them," she cried, her voice breaking. "They're mine." Dr. Mills blinked, his calm demeanor faltering. "Sophia, we just need to take a quick look to make sure they're okay. You're very brave, but you've been through a lot, and we need to understand what's happening." "I don't care," Sophia sobbed, her face scrunched in pain and panic. "They're mine. They're not hurting anyone." Dr. Mills exchanged a glance with Nurse Claire, who gave him a small, helpless shrug. How could they argue with a scared child who was holding on to whatever it was? "Doctor, what do we do?" Nurse Claire whispered, her voice low. "This isn't normal. This can't be normal." Dr. Mills ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I don't know, Claire, but I need answers. Someone call for security and notify Dr. Grant. Tell her we need someone from the genetics department here immediately." Nurse Claire hesitated. "And what do we tell the parents?" Dr. Mills stilled, his expression darkening. "First, we figure out what we're dealing with." 2 hours earlier, Sophia had been at home, sitting on the worn couch in her family's small living room, eating a bowl of cereal and watching cartoons. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting warm golden light on her pale blue pajamas. "Sophia," her mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Don't forget, you have your doctor's appointment today." "I know, Mom," Sophia replied, rolling her eyes. She slurped down the last bit of milk and set the bowl on the coffee table before flipping off the television. Sophia hadn't been feeling well for weeks. It started with fatigue, constant exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Then came the nausea, the stomach cramps, the strange fluttering sensations that sometimes woke her up in the middle of the night. Her mother had assumed it was a bad stomach bug or perhaps a lingering flu, but the symptoms only worsened. "Sophia, are you ready to go?" Her mother, Julia Thompson, appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her face was lined with worry, her brown hair tied back hastily in a bun. "We don't want to be late." "I'm coming," Sophia mumbled, pulling on her sneakers. The drive to the clinic was quiet, save for the sound of the radio playing softly in the background. Julia kept glancing at Sophia in the passenger seat, her expression etched with concern. "You'll feel better soon," Julia said, reaching out to pat her daughter's knee. "The doctor will figure out what's going on." Sophia didn't reply. She stared out the window, her mind hazy and distant. Something felt wrong. When they arrived at the clinic, The waiting room was nearly empty. Sophia sat quietly in a chair, clutching a magazine she wasn't really reading while Julia checked her in at the front desk. "Ms. Thompson," a nurse called a few minutes later, holding a clipboard. "You can come back now." Julia stood and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Come on, sweetie." Sophia followed her mother and the nurse down a brightly lit hallway, her stomach twisting with a sense of dread she couldn't explain. When they reached the small examination room, the nurse handed Sophia a gown. "Change into this, Han, the doctor will be with you shortly." As the nurse left, Julia helped Sophia change into the gown, whispering reassuring words the whole time. But as Sophia sat on the cold examination table, her bare feet dangling, her heart pounded in her chest. "I don't feel good, Mom," Sophia murmured, clutching her stomach. "I know, baby," Julia replied softly, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Just hold on a little longer." When Dr. Mills entered the room, he greeted them warmly, though his smile faltered slightly when he noticed Sophia's pale complexion and weary eyes. "Hi, Sophia. I'm Dr. Mills," he said, pulling up a stool to sit in front of her. "Your mom tells me you haven't been feeling well lately. Can you tell me what's been going on?" Sophia hesitated, her hands resting on her stomach. "It hurts. And I'm really tired all the time. And sometimes it feels like something's moving in there." Dr. Mills frowned, scribbling notes on his clipboard. "Something moving?" Sophia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know how to explain it." "It feels good." Dr. Mills glanced at Julia, his expression unreadable. "We're going to run a few tests, just to be sure everything's okay. Is that all right, Sophia?" Sophia nodded, sniffling. The tests were quick: an ultrasound, blood work, a physical exam. Sophia lay on the examination table, staring at the ceiling as the ultrasound technician pressed the cold wand against her stomach. "Just relax, Sophia," the technician said softly. "This won't take long." But as the black and white image flickered onto the screen, the technician froze, her face draining of color. Dr. Mills, who had been standing nearby, stepped closer, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "Is something wrong?" Julia asked, her voice rising in panic. The technician swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Doctor, you need to see this." Dr. Mills leaned in, his jaw tightening as he stared at the monitor. What he saw made no sense. There, in the shadowy image of Sophia's abdomen, were two distinct shapes. They were small, curled into themselves like infants, but their proportions were all wrong. Their heads were too large, their limbs unnaturally thin, and their spines appeared elongated. Dr. Mills's heart pounded. "Sophia," he said carefully, keeping his voice calm. "How long have you been feeling like this?" "I don't know," Sophia whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A few weeks? Maybe longer?" Julia's face was white. "Doctor, what's happening? What's wrong with my daughter?" Dr. Mills didn't respond. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. The technician whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible. "That's not human." The ultrasound room was silent except for the hum of the machine and Sophia's soft, shaky breathing. Julia Thompson sat frozen in her chair, clutching her hands tightly in her lap, as if squeezing them hard enough could somehow make the nightmare vanish. Dr. Mills continued staring at the screen, his face pale and tight, as the technician slowly moved the ultrasound wand across Sophia's abdomen. The two shapes, clear as day on the monitor, curled in impossible positions, their strange forms outlined in ghostly black and white. "What is that?" Julia finally whispered, her voice trembling. Dr. Mills snapped out of his trance, quickly schooling his features into forced calm. "Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to move Sophia to the hospital immediately. This is highly unusual, and we need specialists to take a closer look." Julia shot to her feet, panic flaring in her eyes. "Hospital? But what are you not telling me?" Dr. Mills hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "There are anomalies that we can't explain yet. I promise we'll figure this out, but for now, it's best that Sophia is monitored closely." "Anomalies?" Julia repeated, her voice rising. "You're talking about my daughter. Tell me what's wrong with her." "Mom?" Sophia's small voice broke through the tension. She looked up at her mother with wide, tear-streaked eyes. "Am I going to be okay?" Julia immediately softened, rushing to Sophia's side and taking her hand. "Of course, sweetheart. You're going to be fine. The doctors are just being extra careful." Dr. Mills turned to the technician. "Get the hospital on the line. I want an ambulance here immediately." Sophia's stomach clenched as she watched her mother and Dr. Mills exchange worried glances. Something was wrong, something far worse than she'd realized. She could feel it deep inside her, like a quiet hum just beneath her skin. "They're not telling me everything," she thought. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur. Sophia lay on a gurney, staring up at the gray ceiling of the vehicle, while her mother sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly. The paramedics murmured in low voices, their expressions carefully blank as they monitored Sophia's vitals. When they arrived at the hospital, Sophia was wheeled into a private room. Nurses bustled around her, attaching monitors to her arms and chest, taking blood samples, and whispering instructions to one another. The room felt cold and sterile, and Sophia shivered beneath the thin hospital blanket. Julia stayed by her side the whole time, refusing to leave. "You're not alone, baby," she whispered, brushing Sophia's hair back gently. "I'm right here." The door opened suddenly, and Dr. Mills stepped inside, flanked by another woman in a white lab coat. The woman had short dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She carried a tablet and introduced herself quickly. "I'm Dr. Grant, head of genetics here at St. Mary's Hospital," she said, offering Julia a tight smile. "Dr. Mills briefed me on Sophia's case, and I'm here to help." "Genetics?" Julia asked, frowning. "What does that have to do with this?" Dr. Grant hesitated, her eyes flickering towards Sophia before turning back to Julia. "Mrs. Thompson, what we're seeing here is highly unusual. We need to run more tests, including scans and genetic mapping, to fully understand what's happening." Julia's face paled. "What's wrong with my daughter?" "We don't know yet," Dr. Grant said carefully. "But I assure you, we'll do everything we can to find out." Sophia looked back and forth between her mother and the doctors, her heart pounding. "Are you going to take them away from me?" she blurted suddenly. Dr. Grant blinked. "Take what away?" Sophia clutched her stomach, her voice shaky. "The babies. The ones inside me." A heavy silence fell over the room. Dr. Mills and Dr. Grant exchanged a look, one filled with unspoken questions. Julia stared at her daughter, horror flickering across her face. "Sophia," Julia whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "What do you mean, the babies?" Sophia's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know how to explain it. I felt them moving for weeks. I don't know where they came from, but I think they're mine." Dr. Grant stepped closer, her expression softening. "Sophia, can you tell me when you first noticed this? When did you start feeling different?" Sophia sniffled, wiping her eyes. "It started a few months ago. I felt tired all the time. Then my stomach started hurting, and it felt like something was fluttering inside me. I thought maybe I was sick, but then I started hearing them." "Hearing them?" Dr. Mills repeated sharply. Sophia nodded. "When I'm really quiet, I can hear them humming. It's like they're talking to me, but I don't understand what they're saying." Julia's hand flew to her mouth, her face stricken. "Oh my God." Dr. Grant took a deep breath, her professional calm never wavering. "Sophia, we're going to take some more images of your stomach, okay? We need to see exactly what's going on." Sophia nodded slowly, her small body trembling. "Okay." The MRI machine hummed softly as Sophia lay perfectly still inside the large tube, her heart thudding in her chest. The nurses had placed headphones over her ears, but the soft music did little to calm her nerves. She squeezed her eyes shut, focusing on her breathing as the machine clicked and whirred around her. From the observation room, Dr. Grant and Dr. Mills watched the images appear on the screen, their expressions growing more and more incredulous with each passing second. "What is that?" Dr. Mills muttered, his voice barely audible. Dr. Grant zoomed in on the image, her brows furrowed in concentration. The shapes inside Sophia's abdomen were clearer now, two distinct forms curled together like twins. But they were not human. Their proportions were wrong, their skeletal structure alien, their limbs too thin and elongated. "This isn't possible," Dr. Grant whispered, her voice tight. "This defies everything we know about biology." "Could it be a mutation?" Dr. Mills asked, though his voice held little conviction. Dr. Grant shook her head. "No, this is something else entirely." She turned to one of the nurses nearby. "Call the director of the hospital. I want this entire case locked down. No leaks to the public, no unauthorized personnel in or out of this wing." "What are you thinking?" Dr. Mills asked, his face pale. Dr. Grant stared at the screen, her voice low and firm. "I don't know what we're dealing with, but whatever it is, it's not from here." When Sophia was wheeled back into her hospital room, she felt drained, as though the machine had pulled the very energy out of her. Julia sat anxiously by the bed, clutching her hands in her lap as the doctors whispered outside the door. "Mom?" Sophia croaked weakly. Julia turned immediately, her eyes soft with worry. "I'm here, baby." "I'm scared," Sophia whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "What's happening to me?" Julia leaned in, brushing Sophia's hair back gently. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to figure it out. I promise." The door opened and Dr. Grant entered the room, her expression serious but calm. "Sophia," she said gently, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "We need to talk about what's happening. The scans show that there are two beings inside you. Two babies, as you called them. But they're not like anything we've seen before." Sophia looked down at her stomach, her arms instinctively wrapping around it. "They're not hurting me. I can feel them, and I think they're okay." Dr. Grant nodded. "I believe you. But we need to make sure you're safe too. We're going to keep you here for a while, just to monitor everything closely." "Are they alive?" Julia asked shakily, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Grant paused before answering. "Yes, they're alive. And they're growing." Julia slumped back in her chair, her face pale. Sophia looked up at Dr. Grant, her voice small but steady. "Will you take care of them?" Dr. Grant blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Of course, Sophia. We'll do everything we can to keep you, and them, safe." Sophia nodded, resting her head against the pillow. She could feel the soft hum deep inside her, a faint, soothing vibration that no one else seemed to hear. "They're not here to hurt me," she thought. "They're mine and they need me." Days passed, and the hospital wing where Sophia was kept remained locked down, a restricted zone guarded by security. Rumors had already begun swirling through the staff. Nurses whispered in hallways, their voices hushed and anxious. Doctors exchanged uneasy glances as they pored over Sophia's test results, searching for answers they couldn't find. Inside her private room, Sophia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The machines beeped rhythmically, a quiet backdrop to her thoughts. Julia never left her side, sitting on the edge of the bed and smoothing her daughter's hair with a gentleness only a mother could offer. "Do you feel okay today, sweetheart?" Julia asked softly. Sophia nodded faintly, her small hands resting on her stomach. "I feel warm, like they're keeping me safe." Julia bit her lip, her worry deepening. "Who, baby? Who's keeping you safe?" "The twins," Sophia whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I can hear them. They're talking to me, but not with words. It's like humming. They're happy." Julia froze, her heart pounding. "Sophia, are you sure? What do you mean they're talking to you?" Sophia turned her head toward her mother, her wide, brown eyes filled with an eerie calm. "I don't know how to explain it, Mom, but they're not bad. They're mine." Julia tried to smile, though her hands trembled. "Of course, sweetheart. I just want you to be okay." Before Sophia could respond, the door opened, and Dr. Grant entered with Dr. Mills close behind. They both wore serious expressions, though Dr. Grant's demeanor remained calm and composed. "How are you feeling today, Sophia?" Dr. Grant asked, pulling a chair up beside the bed. "I'm okay," Sophia replied softly. Dr. Grant nodded. "That's good to hear. We've been watching the results from your tests very carefully, Sophia. The twins inside you are growing much faster than anything we've seen before." Julia's eyes widened. "Growing? How is that even possible?" Dr. Grant hesitated, glancing toward Dr. Mills before continuing. We don't know yet. Their biology is completely unique. But we need to monitor Sophia very closely to make sure she stays healthy. They're not hurting me, Sophia said quickly, her voice firm. I promise. I can feel them and they're safe. Dr. Grant studied Sophia carefully, her brow furrowing. Sophia, you said before that you can hear them, like a humming sound. Can you tell me more about that? Sophia hesitated, glancing down at her hands. It's hard to explain. It's like music, but not music. It's a feeling. When I'm quiet, it's like they're singing to me. I think they love me. The room fell silent. Julia's face crumpled with confusion and fear, while Dr. Grant and Dr. Mills exchanged another tense glance. Sophia, Dr. Grant said gently, have you had any dreams lately? Anything strange that you can remember? Sophia's eyes flickered up, her voice dropping to a whisper. Sometimes. I see lights. Big, bright lights, and they're everywhere. It feels like I'm floating in a big, open sky. And I hear them calling to me, soft and far away, like they're waiting for me. Julia's hand flew to her mouth, her face ashen. Oh my God! Dr. Mills leaned forward, his voice calm but urgent. Sophia, do you remember anything else? Anything about when this started? Sophia shook her head. No. I just woke up one day and it felt different. Dr. Grant sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. We need to do more tests. Sophia, you've been so brave. Just a little while longer, okay? Sophia nodded. But please don't hurt them. We won't, Dr. Grant replied, her voice soft but firm. I promise. As the days stretched into a week, the story of Sophia's condition became harder to contain. Despite the hospital's best efforts to keep the situation quiet, whispers began to leak beyond the lockdown wing. Staff members shared stories with friends and family, and soon enough, the media caught wind of the mysterious case of the 12-year-old girl. News vans began parking outside St. Mary's Hospital, reporters swarming the sidewalks and pointing their cameras toward the windows. Questions swirled. What's wrong with Sophia Thompson? Why the secrecy? Inside the hospital, Sophia's condition continued to change. Her belly grew at an unnatural rate, stretching the thin fabric of her hospital gown. Nurses tiptoed into her room with nervous smiles, checking the machines but saying little. Sophia sensed their unease. One night, as rain pattered softly against the window, Sophia lay awake staring into the darkness. Her mother had dozed off in the chair beside her bed, her breathing slow and steady. Sophia placed her hands gently on her swollen stomach. The humming sound was louder now, soft and melodic, like a lullaby only she could hear. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. We're okay, she whispered, as if reassuring the creatures inside her. Suddenly, a sharp pain stabbed through her abdomen, making her gasp. Her eyes shot open as the pain rippled through her body like a wave. Mom! Sophia cried, her voice shaky and hoarse. Julia jolted awake, rushing to her daughter's side. Sophia? What's wrong? Are you in pain? They're moving, Sophia whimpered, clutching her stomach. It's not like before. It's stronger now. Julia pressed the emergency call button frantically. Within moments, the door burst open, and a team of doctors and nurses flooded into the room. Dr. Grant led the group, her calm professionalism unshaken despite the urgency. What's happening? Julia shouted, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Grant checked the monitors quickly, her eyes narrowing as she read the results. The twins are shifting. There, she paused, searching for the right word. They're preparing for something. Preparing? Julia cried, her voice rising with panic. What does that even mean? Sophia groaned, her body trembling as another wave of pain hit her. They're not hurting me, she gasped. They're just trying to come out? The room went still. Every doctor and nurse froze, staring at Sophia as the words hung in the air. Trying to come out? Dr. Mills repeated, his voice barely audible. Dr. Grant turned sharply to the team. We need to prep for delivery now. I don't care how unusual this is, Sophia's safety is our top priority. The staff sprang into action, wheeling machines closer to the bed and draping sterile sheets around Sophia. Julia hovered nearby, her face pale and stricken as she watched the chaos unfold. "Stay with me, Sophia," Dr. Grant said firmly, taking the girl's hand. "You're going to be okay. Just breathe." Sophia nodded weakly, her breathing ragged. "They're ready," she whispered. "I can feel them." Dr. Grant glanced up at the monitors, her expression a mixture of awe and dread. "Then let's get ready to meet them." Outside the hospital, the rain continued to fall, streaking the windows with silver. News cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions into their microphones. No one knew the full truth of what was happening inside the lockdown wing of St. Mary's Hospital, but they would soon, because the impossible was about to happen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sterile hum of medical machines filled the room, punctuated by the hurried voices of doctors and nurses as they prepared for the impossible. Sophia lay in the hospital bed, her small body dwarfed by the blankets and wires surrounding her. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead as she clutched her stomach, her breathing ragged but steady. "Deep breaths, Sophia," Dr. Grant said calmly, though her own voice betrayed a hint of unease. "You're doing great. Just keep breathing, okay?" Sophia nodded faintly, her face pale but determined. "They're almost here," she whispered. Julia stood nearby, gripping the edge of the bed so tightly her knuckles turned white. "She's just a child," she murmured, her voice shaking as she looked at Dr. Grant. "You have to stop this. There has to be a way to stop this." "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Grant said gently but firmly, "we can't stop it. Whatever is happening to Sophia is beyond anything we've ever seen, but I promise you, we're doing everything we can to keep her safe." Tears streamed down Julia's face as she sank into the chair beside the bed. "This isn't fair. She's just a little girl." Sophia reached out weakly, her fingers brushing her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "They're not hurting me. They're just ready to come out." The monitors beeped faster, an alarm going off as the nurses sprang into action. "Her vitals are spiking," a nurse shouted. "BP's rising, heart rates erratic," another added, panic creeping into her voice. Dr. Grant leaned closer to Sophia, her hands steady but her eyes wide with fear. "Sophia, stay with me. You need to focus on breathing. Can you do that?" Sophia groaned as another sharp wave of pain crashed through her body. The humming, soft and faint before, was now deafening in her mind. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a song. A rhythmic, otherworldly melody that filled every corner of her being. "They're here," she thought. "They're coming." Suddenly, a blinding light burst from her abdomen, so bright it illuminated the entire room like the flash of a camera. The doctors and nurses staggered back, shielding their eyes. Julia cried out, falling to her knees beside the bed. "What's happening?" Dr. Mills shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaotic noise of machines blaring and the strange hum reverberating through the air. The light dimmed slightly, just enough for Dr. Grant to see Sophia. She was no longer writhing in pain. She was still. Completely still, her hands resting on her stomach, her face serene. "Sophia?" Dr. Grant called cautiously, inching closer. "Sophia, can you hear me?" Sophia opened her eyes slowly, and when she did, everyone froze. Her once brown eyes now glowed faintly with a soft, silver light. "They're here," Sophia whispered, her voice echoing slightly as if more than one voice spoke through her. Dr. Grant's breath caught in her throat as she looked down. The blanket covering Sophia's abdomen shifted, and something moved beneath it. Slowly, two small figures emerged from the fabric, one on each side of Sophia. The room fell deathly silent. The beings were small, no larger than newborn babies, but their proportions were unlike anything human. Their skin was smooth and gray, with a faint shimmer like polished stone. Their limbs were thin but elegant, their hands ending in delicate fingers tipped with small, glowing patterns. But it was their eyes that captured everyone's attention. Large, black, and reflective, their gaze seemed to pierce through the room, intelligent and aware. The creatures turned towards Sophia, making soft clicking sounds, an eerie but somehow soothing melody. Sophia smiled faintly, her arms trembling as she reached out to touch them. "Hello," she whispered. "I knew you were coming." Dr. Grant stared in stunned silence, her hands shaking. "This isn't possible," she murmured. "This defies everything we know." Julia sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "What are they? What's happening to my daughter?" Dr. Mills stepped closer, his face pale. "Dr. Grant, what do we do?" "We need to..." "Stop," Dr. Grant said sharply, holding up a hand. "Nobody move." The creatures blinked slowly, their glowing patterns pulsing faintly as they curled closer to Sophia, nestling against her like newborns seeking warmth. Sophia stroked their smooth skin gently, her face soft with love and wonder. "They're not dangerous," Sophia said suddenly, looking up at Dr. Grant. "They're mine. And they're safe." Dr. Grant swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Sophia, do you understand them? Do you know what they are?" Sophia nodded faintly, her glowing eyes locking onto Dr. Grant's. "They came to me because they were lost. They're not from here. They don't belong here, but they trust me." Dr. Mills's voice shook as he spoke. "And what do they want?" Sophia tilted her head, listening to the soft clicking sounds of the creatures. "They just want to survive," she replied. "They want to go home." Outside the hospital, the chaos was reaching a fever pitch. News helicopters hovered overhead, their cameras trained on the upper floors of the building. Reporters shouted into microphones, speculating wildly about the strange events taking place behind the hospital's closed doors. Inside, the tension grew as Dr. Grant and her team tried to process what they were witnessing. Security guards were stationed outside Sophia's room, ensuring that no one unauthorized could enter. Dr. Grant pulled Dr. Mills aside, her voice low and urgent. "We can't keep this quiet for much longer. The media already knows something's happening, and when they find out the truth..." Dr. Mills shook his head. "We can't tell anyone. People will panic. This is beyond anything the world has ever seen." "And what about Sophia?" Dr. Grant shot back. "She's just a child and she's bonded with them. Whatever they are, they trust her." Dr. Mills sighed, rubbing his temples. "So what do we do? Keep her here forever? Experiment on them? You know that's what some people will suggest." "No," Dr. Grant said firmly, her eyes narrowing. "We're not treating Sophia or those beings like lab rats. We need to figure out how to help them, on Sophia's terms." "And if we can't?" Dr. Mills asked, his voice hollow. Dr. Grant hesitated, glancing back toward the room where Sophia lay with the creatures curled protectively at her side. "Then we let them go." That night, Sophia sat up in bed, her glowing eyes dim but steady. The creatures rested beside her, their faint hum lulling her into a calm state. Julia sat nearby, watching with quiet awe and fear. "Mom," Sophia whispered suddenly, breaking the silence. Julia looked up, her face etched with exhaustion. "What is it, sweetheart?" "They're ready to leave," Sophia said, her voice distant. "They're calling to something. Something far away." Julia frowned. "Leave? Leave where?" Sophia placed a hand over one of the creatures, feeling its warmth. "Home. They're not meant to be here. But they can't leave without me." Julia's face crumpled. "No. No, Sophia, you're staying here. With me." Sophia looked up, her silver eyes shimmering with sadness. "Mom, I love you. But they need me. I'm the only one who can help them." Before Julia could respond, a low rumble vibrated through the room. The machines beeped wildly, and the lights flickered as an unnatural energy filled the air. Outside the window, the dark sky lit up with a strange, pulsing glow. Julia screamed, rushing to Sophia's side. "What's happening?" Sophia smiled faintly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "They're coming to take us home." The low rumble that filled the hospital room grew louder, vibrating through the walls and floor like a heartbeat. The machines monitoring Sophia flickered wildly, their lights blinking erratically before shorting out with a crackle of static. Outside, the strange glow pulsed in the dark sky, casting an otherworldly light through the window. Julia clutched Sophia's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face as the room trembled around them. "Sophia, what's happening? What's going on?" Sophia sat perfectly still, her silver eyes locked on the window as though she could see something far beyond the hospital walls. The creatures nestled close to her sides, their soft humming growing louder, resonating with the energy in the air. "They're coming," Sophia said softly, her voice calm despite the chaos. The door burst open, and Dr. Grant stormed in, flanked by a team of nervous nurses and 2 security guards. "What's happening in here?" Dr. Grant demanded, her voice rising above the hum. "What's causing this?" "It's them," Sophia replied, looking up at Dr. Grant with glowing eyes. "They're calling home, and it's answering." Dr. Grant froze, her gaze darting between the small alien beings, Sophia, and the pulsing light outside the window. "Home," she whispered. "They don't belong here," Sophia said, her voice steady and clear. "They came to me because I could help them, and now their family is coming to take them back." Dr. Mills appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he stared at the trembling hospital bed. "Dr. Grant, the energy surge is spreading across the hospital. We need to evacuate the wing." "We're not leaving, Sophia," Julia shouted, her voice sharp with desperation. "She's not going anywhere." The guards stepped forward hesitantly, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Dr. Grant raised a hand, signaling them to stop. "Nobody touches Sophia. Do you hear me?" Julia turned to Dr. Grant, her face pleading. "You have to stop this. She's my little girl. You can't let them take her." Dr. Grant's expression softened as she knelt beside Julia. "Mrs. Thompson, listen to me. I don't know what's happening here, but Sophia has a connection to these beings. She's the only one who understands them, and right now, she's telling us they need to go home. We have to trust her." Julia shook her head violently, fresh tears falling. "She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. This isn't fair, none of this is fair." Sophia turned toward her mother, her glowing eyes full of love and sadness. "Mom," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. Julia hesitated before taking it, her fingers shaking. "I don't want to lose you," she cried. "You won't," Sophia said softly. "I'll always be with you. But they need me now. I'm the only one who can help them find their way." Julia sobbed, pressing her forehead against Sophia's hand. "Why does it have to be you?" Sophia smiled faintly, her voice gentle. "Because I was the one who heard them. I was the one who found them when they were lost. And now I have to help them get home." The humming grew louder, filling the room with a rhythmic, almost melodic vibration that seemed to echo in every corner. The window glowed brighter, the strange energy outside reaching a crescendo as the entire hospital wing shook. Dr. Grant turned to Dr. Mills, her voice low and firm. "We need to clear this floor." "No." "But what about Sophia?" Dr. Mills asked, his voice cracking. Dr. Grant looked back at the girl, who sat serenely in the bed with the creatures nestled close beside her. "She knows what she's doing." Dr. Mills nodded reluctantly before turning to the guards. "Evacuate everyone. Move." The guards hesitated for only a moment before rushing to clear the hallway, barking orders to the staff as they ushered people to safety. Julia remained by Sophia's side, tears streaming silently as she clutched her daughter's hand. "I love you, Sophia," Julia whispered brokenly. "I love you too, Mom," Sophia replied, her voice trembling. "I'll be okay. I promise." Outside the hospital, the glow in the sky had grown impossibly bright. People gathered on the sidewalks, staring upward in awe and confusion. The news cameras captured the spectacle, their reporters shouting into microphones as the light pulsed with an unearthly rhythm. "It's like nothing we've ever seen before," one reporter said breathlessly. Some are calling it an unexplained atmospheric event, while others speculate it could be something far more extraordinary. What's clear is that St. Mary's Hospital is at the center of it all. Above the hospital, the clouds swirled and parted, revealing a massive shape emerging from the glow. It was a ship, vast and otherworldly, its metallic surface shimmering as it hovered silently over the building. The light it emitted bathed the streets below, casting a silver glow over everything it touched. Gasps and screams echoed through the crowd as people pointed toward the sky. Some dropped to their knees, while others ran for cover. But the ship remained still, a quiet, undeniable presence that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. Inside the hospital room, the humming reached a peak. The creatures nestled closer to Sophia, their small, glowing patterns pulsing in perfect sync with the energy outside. "They're here," Sophia whispered, her voice filled with awe. The window exploded outward, not in shards, but in a brilliant burst of light that left the glass intact. The energy swirled into the room, lifting Sophia and the creatures gently off the bed. Julia screamed, reaching for her daughter, but Dr. Grant grabbed her arm, holding her back. "Sophia!" Julia cried. Sophia turned to her mother one last time, her glowing silver eyes full of love. "Don't be afraid, Mom. I'm going home." The creatures clicked softly, their sounds harmonizing into a soothing melody as the light enveloped them. The room was filled with a blinding brilliance, so bright that Julia, Dr. Grant, and everyone else had to shield their eyes. And then, silence. Some believed Sophia was a hero, chosen to help a species in need. Others dismissed it as myth, a story that had grown larger than life. But for those who had been there, Julia, Dr. Grant, and the few others who had witnessed the impossible, the truth was undeniable. Julia had moved to a small house in the countryside, far from the noise and chaos of the city. She spent her days tending a small garden, her evenings spent staring up at the stars. Sophia's stone sat on the windowsill, its faint glow a quiet reminder of the daughter she had loved, and still loved, more than anything. One summer night, as Julia stood barefoot in the grass, staring at the blanket of stars above, she felt a familiar hum vibrate through the air. Her breath caught. The hum grew louder, resonating deep in her chest, and the sky shimmered with soft, silver light. Julia smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks as she whispered, "I hear you, baby." The light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, before fading again, leaving the night sky calm and still. For the rest of the world, it was an ordinary night. But for Julia, it was everything. Her daughter was out there, alive, loved, and watching over her. And that was enough. Epilogue: The Lullaby of the Stars. Years later, children would sit around campfires, listening wide-eyed as stories were told of the 12-year-old girl who gave birth to alien twins and disappeared into a glowing ship. Some called it a fairy tale, others a miracle. But somewhere, far beyond the stars, Sophia sat surrounded by light and warmth, her silver eyes gazing down at a blue and green planet spinning quietly in the vast expanse of space. She heard her mother's whispered words, soft as the hum that had called to her so long ago, and smiled. She wasn't lost. She was home.